White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents Ask About Alt Text. At left, a welcome sign with CCAC logo. At top right, the speaker. Below, an ASL interpreter signs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Wilson. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn program. This is presented by the CCAC. You can ask, this is our Lunch and Learn series called Ask About Alt Text, where you can ask anything that you would like to learn about alt text. I'm one of the steering committee members of the CCAC. I use he, him pronouns. I'm going to give a visual description of myself, as we're all going to do during this program. So I am a white man in my early 30s. I have short, light brown hair, a reddish beard. I have glasses, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I'm right in front of two of my windows, which are closed right now, but they give sort of a bright, sunny glow behind me. For those of you who are not familiar with the CCAC, our mission is to empower Chicago's cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. We have 4 pillars that we focus on for that work. That includes free professional development workshops, a little bit like this, our accessible equipment loan program, an accessible event calendar for the area, and our growing statewide network. This program is being recorded, so it can be used as a resource on the CCAC website for folks who are unable to attend this, or if you would like to watch it over again. Accessibility is a priority for us, and our program today includes real-time captioning provided by Dylan Reporting, as well as ASL interpretation provided by Faith Interpreting Services. If you'd like to use the ASL interpreter, you can choose to pin their window by clicking on the 3 dots in the corner of their image. We especially recommend pinning if you're using a mobile device. That will make sure that they remain visible. You can also use gallery view, and the ASL interpreter will be spotlighted. We've taken care of that part. If you'd like to view the captions in a separate browser, you can do so using the stream text link that's going to be included in the chat. Since this is a Lunch and Learn Q&A, we encourage you to submit questions that you have for our presenter using the chat function. If you have any issues with accessibility, also, you can reach out to our support team via the chat function as well. And in case you don't want to see those chat pop-ups, you can turn off Show Chat Previews by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Joining us today, we have Bojana Kokliat. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yes. So this is Bojana speaking. I am a white woman in my early 40s, pretty smiley. I have my blonde bangs combed forward to the left. My hair's in a ponytail, wearing some fabulous earrings because I'm excited about today. They are clip-on, long, dangling vintage earrings. They're like a triangle with pearls at the bottom. Wearing a coral long sleeve shirt. Use she, her pronouns. And behind me is a light green wall, and I have one of my paintings, which is a kind of a semi-self-portrait of a woman looking down with a crown of stars around her head and a white scarf. I live with low vision. I identify more with saying I'm blind just because I'm within blind culture. I am an artist, activist. I work on the Alt Text as Poetry project with Shannon Finnegan. I also am currently working on a film, a documentary film for the American Foundation for the Blind on contemporary blind culture, where I have interviewed over 30 different awesome blind people talking about different contemporary issues in the blind community. And I really love talking about alt text. I think it's really important. I think that it is exciting, and I love thinking about how it can be used as a creative element.
Thank you, Bojana. We're really pleased that you're here. We have a couple of questions that we've prepared beforehand just to get us in the groove and cover some basic things.
Yes.
And our most basic question to start with is, what is alt text?
Yes, what is alt text? Alt text is a type of image description that is used more with digital devices. So, your laptop, your phone, computer, and it is one of the most important types of access for people who are living with low vision or who are blind. But also, it can be used for people with certain cognitive disabilities or certain print disabilities. And I like to think about it as a digital or an invisible digital ramp, because if you aren't using a screen reader, you're not going to be using the alt text. It's something that is encoded into the HTML of a website and is only picked up by a screen reader or screen reader software, which can either mean something that is text to voice type of software, or it can be text to a refreshable braille display. And for me, when I am navigating a website, I might start at the address bar, get down to the different headings, get to some of the paragraphs, and then the alt text comes into play once I get to an image on that website. And there's one of several things that might happen. Hopefully, when I get to an image, there is that alt text that is encoded, and it will then read to me, encoded by a person, and then it will read to me what this image is, hopefully providing a sufficient description to give me an idea of what's going on. But very often I get to an image with my screen reader, and my screen reader will either say, read to me, no alt text available, or it will read out a long number like 6,575,000, just go on this long number, or it will give me some very insufficient automatically generated alt text, which might be something like one face or a tree, and a lot of times that's an incorrect description. So I just want to reiterate that alt text is under this umbrella of different types of image description, but it's the one that's used digitally. Like, for instance, if you're working in a museum, you might have done verbal description, which is you're with a group of people in person describing a painting, or there's audio description, which is used for film or TV or performance, where somebody has timed the description between the dialogue to describe the action. And sometimes people will just use image description to describe a longer, more in-depth description of something that may be a paragraph or two long. But this is still shifting, and we're still kind of coming to different understandings of what different types of image description are and how they're categorized.
And I just want to mention, this was something that we talked about previously when you mentioned just earlier about insufficient alt text, something that's just like a face or a tree.
Yes.
That's usually a symptom of these like auto-generated AI
Yes.
alt text sort of captioners.
Correct.
So I just wanted to mention, if that is something that you've been hearing about or been tempted on using, it may not be sufficient just to use those. I also want to pick up on the point that you mentioned where you compare alt text as poetry, and your website really goes into detail about this, but would you elaborate on this idea of alt text and its comparison or relation to poetry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one thing that I come across when I do these workshops with Shannon Finnegan, where we are talking about alt text as poetry, people are concerned, oh no, I'm gonna have to write a poem. Like, I can't write a poem for every image. And we are absolutely not asking people to write poetry. I can't write poetry. What we really want to do is we want to draw from this huge well of knowledge that already exists within poetry, right? So 3 things that we really think about when we're talking about poetry. First thing is attention to language. So when you are writing alt text and you are really paying attention to the language that you're using, the words that you're choosing, what mood are you evoking, just doing that starts to shift how people have previously been doing alt text, because it has been done in this very lens of compliance, this very perfunctory, chore-like way. But once you start paying attention to the language you're using, that makes a difference. Second thing is word economy. In poetry, the way words are put together, or the certain words that are chosen, and being able to put together something that has an impact or evokes that sense of mood through either efficiently through maybe 1 or 2 sentences or 3. So we think about that too. How can we provide this a good description or an engaging description without having to use like a paragraph or 2 to write that description. And then thirdly, the thing that really excites me is having an experimental approach. Like with poetry, you can play around with words. You're not so caught up in like doing things seamlessly or so maybe academically, or you can play around, and we absolutely encourage that with alt text. I really enjoy alt text that is written where it's very self-aware, or where somebody might be saying, oh, I'm in this photo, I'm kicking myself for forgetting my keys. And, now this is my face when I'm upset. I love, that. And why not? Like, why not evoke that sense of that mood or that feeling that you have internally? Because sometimes that can be better than, there's this red square in the corner, and now 3 inches below that red square is so it takes a little bit of practice and it's a process, but keeping those 3 things in mind, I think, can help write more engaging or creative alt text.
Yeah. And we definitely spoke about how the tone of your alt text may shift based on like what organization you're a part of, who you're representing. A personal blog's alt text may be different than, your corporate blog alt text, and how the purpose of the image that you're including may shift what you decide is important in your alt text. And that you may also need to pull in experts in a field that you are not familiar with. If this is an image that's, a mechanical image of an engine and putting together pieces of the engine, you may not be the most qualified to make the alt text for that. And it might be important to reach out to someone in your organization who has that expertise.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a big difference, and I love that you kept talking about if you're describing food, which is, I always love to describe, different things via a food metaphor. But if you're describing something, for, let's say, a website that has to do with food, there's definitely going to be a difference than if you're describing something for a museum. And there are different institutional voices for each different institution. Like if you're writing, like you were saying, something that is very technical for a website that's dealing with whatever different kinds of mechanics, that's going to be very different than how you write your own image descriptions or alt text on your social media. You can be a little bit more playful with your own, but there may be an institutional voice. There may even be a certain protocol that you have to follow with a different institution. And I do think that even, and we might get into this a little bit later, but if you're writing the alt text for an institution, that doesn't necessarily make you the expert on that image or on that alt text. And I think it's always a good idea to reach out for another opinion, or to reach out to somebody else that you may know that has more knowledge or information. And it's never a bad thing to ask questions. I think it's really important.
Our next question we wanted to talk about is how brief you need to be. You spoke about word economy with poetry, and that's especially important for alt text, and things that you might suggest cutting for brevity, especially because there are some platforms that really limit the word count that you have. So what are your suggestions about briefness and brevity?
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention that I think is really interesting, and something that has influenced this idea of alt text having to be short, is initially when the first screen readers were coming out, they could only read 125 characters at a time. And so that has, and that's like 20, 30 years ago, but that kind of has proliferated this idea that things have to be short for blind people. And it's like, whoa, okay, we have so much more technology, but yet we're still stuck in this same cycle of short alt text because of what was initiated 30 years ago, what were the limitations as far as screen readers 30 years ago. So it's shifting, though, on things like Squarespace, or I know WordPress, still it's very few characters that can be added in for alt text. Though that is also, it's changing. Like for instance, on Twitter, it's now a 1,500 character limit. Instagram, it almost seems like there's an endless limit. It's pretty vast. And so that is changing as well, because these are things that blind people have been asking for, and there is the capacity to do it. I would say, though, if you are limited to having to write a shorter alt text, it's really, it takes practice, first of all. So don't, be hard on yourself if you struggle at first. It takes practice. And what you really want to say, to think when you're putting in the alt text is, how am I making this as equal an experience for a blind person as much as for somebody who is sighted looking at this photo? What is the key thing that is that needs to be surfaced here, that needs to be talked about? And that might include, the context of what is being described. Like, for instance, there was limited space to describe the flyer for this Lunch and Learn, right? So instead of like this longer description, for me, it's, it's like Bojana smiling, holding a cup of coffee, which, okay, that is what I'm doing. I think those are good choices. Or it also then, for the description of the CCAC logo, it just like talked about the text. It didn't individually talk about how many triangles are in this image, right? So it takes a little time, but like really try to hone in on what the focus should be, what's most important, like what does the blind person need to know that's in this photo.
Okay, I'm going to move us on to our most complex question. And I imagine that we'll get additional questions about that, because
Sure.
that came in as a question in some of our registration materials.
Okay.
What are the suggestions that you have for describing race and gender?
So first thing I want to say is, me as a white, straight, cisgendered woman who's, middle-aged, like, I do not have that lived experience. And so I am by no means an expert. What I'm going to talk about is what the information I've gathered from other people in those communities, and what has been the different complex things that have come up in image description that I've seen. We are also going to add a resource by Sins Invalid, which is an amazing group of people who really started the movement around disability justice, or creating that visibility around disability justice and putting that together for people to understand. That includes, not just disability, but trans community, queer communities, BIPOC communities. And I would highly recommend you look into that organization. But what I talk about, and in these workshops, and when I talk about describing identity, first thing is, if you have to post an image of somebody on your website, or if you're posting something on your Instagram, first reach out to the person who you are going to be describing and ask if there is a certain way that they want to be described. I think most importantly, you always want to start with that, and also, ensuring that that person feels respected in how they're being described, and to also understand that describing identity it can be very charged. It can be political, and understanding that maybe the power dynamics that are at play when you're describing someone. So first, I would say reaching out to the person who you are describing. If that's not possible, I would say, try to find out on social media, their social media, how they may prefer to be described. And I will also say, it's important to not erase a person's identity. I think, sometimes there is this concern, which is understandable, to not misgender somebody, or to misidentify somebody. But I think it's also important to not erase that. And so there is a balance. There's no silver bullet. There's no one right answer, right? It's a case by case basis. And something else I want to talk about as far as identity as well is, I often see this where white people don't describe themselves as white. They'll say, I'm a woman with brown hair, I'm a woman with blonde hair, I think that is also something that needs to be thought about and discussed, because it's almost seen as a default in this country. Even if you think about the news, how they describe someone, they might just say this man was 21, and they may say this Black man was 21. Like, we are so inundated with that way of thinking that whiteness is the default. And I think that's also something important to think about when describing identity in a photo. I would also recommend that if you are describing somebody's identity and you're not sure, then do not make it as though you have the definitive authority, or that you are the expert on this person's identity. So maybe this person seems to be female presenting, or this person seems to or this person has, maybe just describing the skin color that you see. I think by doing that, by saying it seems like it appears to be, as opposed to it is, I think that also makes a difference. And this is obviously a more complex issue. And I think our website, the Alt Text Poetry website, also talks more about that. But I would also check out the Sins Invalid website as well to actually hear from people who have that actual lived experience.
I feel like, as with a lot of things with access, one of the things that will help is always more communication with the people that you're describing, communication with your social media team, communication with, who took the photos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And one other thing I want to add really quickly is there's the Lesbian Museum. I'm sorry, not the Leslie Lohman Museum of Lesbian and Gay Art. And they recently sent out, it was a flyer about an upcoming exhibit, and they described somebody in this photo as a man. And then it got back to the museum that this person did not want to be described as a man. They would rather be described as a person. And after a back and forth, they, in a very, I think, collaborative way, they decided to issue an addendum and say, we misidentified this person. They prefer to be identified as a person. And I think it's also really, it can be important to be transparent about making those kinds of mistakes, and to go back, or, actually, Andy, you pointed out something that I think is important, to make sure the person is comfortable having that addendum or making that transparency clear, because they may not want to have that be repeated or reproduced, or have that experience deepened. And so it's, again, just like you said, Andy, communication is so important.
So we've gone over our prepared questions now. So now's a great time to go into questions from our audience members here. So I'm going to look at what we've gotten added into our chat and see. Okay, so a good question to start with is, how can I, as an ally, help to, quote unquote, call in other organizations or folks that aren't using alt text?
It's interesting. I've been really been navigating a lot of this right now as a blind person who has been featured in several publications that were not accessible. I would say, I would start out with trying to contact them directly, and talking to them about the lack of alt text and explaining why it's important. Now, in an ideal world, so whoever gets that message will be like, oh yes, of course, we will start doing that now. But it doesn't usually happen like that. And so what I may do is I will start to ask in this person's social media or organization's social media, like in the comments, like, what is this image? Or I will ask, can other people help describe this image? And so I think that sometimes you may need that support from other people who are, within that same group. And I would say, and on top of that, just you be a good model for it. I would say, having your descriptions in your captions where it can be clear, where other people can learn. I think that's also really important.
And since this is recorded, you can send them a link to this video.
Yes.
I have another question that was sent to us during the registration process. This is more technical. Is it preferable to write alt text as part of the social media caption, or in the designated alt text field when you're uploading a photo?
This is a great question. And I think it's always so important when it comes to access to give people options, because first of all, not all blind people are going to maybe go for that alt text, and not all blind people are going to want the, description and the captions, right? So I think it's great, to give people options. I would say in a more technical, efficient, logical way of thinking, if I'm going through Instagram, let's say, and I'm going like I'm tabbing through the images, if I don't sense that there's alt text on the image, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to go for it. Like it makes me much less likely. And second of all, if there is something that for instance, I was in an interview for Art in America recently, and I went to their post about the article that I was interviewed in, and there was no alt text, and then there was just about like 4 or 5 paragraphs talking about the issue and the article, and then there was a description of the artwork, and then there was it was actually the dimensions of the artwork, and then 2 more spaces below that was the image description. And it's like, what? Like, what? I have to go through all of that to get to understand what the image is? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I did ask them, hey, Art in America, maybe you could put the alt text. And they're like, oh no, that's redundant. And that's where that's at right now. So, yep. Yeah, this is 2022 and that stuff is still happening with this disability art issue. Anyways, yeah.
This is a question specifically about PowerPoint. So if this is not something that you use, maybe we can field it to someone else. I give a lot of PowerPoint presentations with diagrams that often have words in them. And when I run the accessibility checker, it says that alt text is missing. Is it appropriate to click the mark as decorative button? In other words, when is it most appropriate to click that mark as decorative button?
Ooh, you know what? This is something that is outside of my wheelhouse, but I will say that it's interesting. I had worked for the New York City Museum Art and Cultural Access Consortium, and they have a great document about making PowerPoints accessible, and I'm sure that would be in there. So you might want to check that out, because that's really not, I don't know what would help with that.
Yeah, I guess that's part of sort of a larger question of like, when is it completely unnecessary to describe an image? And is there ever a time where it's completely unnecessary to describe an image?
I would say that if you have an image up and you're using it for people who are sighted, then that should be described to the person who's blind in that space. Because I understand it's like we have so much like visual clutter, and maybe a PowerPoint or website, and so maybe you want to ask yourself, why is this even here? If I don't need to, if I'm thinking about, does the blind person need to even have this described, that maybe it shouldn't be there for the sighted people. And I think this goes beyond access. Like, this is it. We have to stop thinking about this as just providing a service, providing accommodations. We're talking about culture. We're talking about community. We're talking about welcoming. And we, in that way, sometimes that means we need to pull back on thinking about sighted people, like, or maybe we have to think about, why is this image here? Is it just to create a more of a dynamic space? Is it just decoration? If it is, then does it really need to be there? So I think that if you have it on a page, then it should be described. Otherwise, maybe it just doesn't need to be there.
This is about resources, and we will have a resource document to share, but what's your favorite go-to resource to send to organizations about alt text? This person mentions the Cooper Hewitt's guideline, which I've seen as well and is great, but is there any that you think are exceptional?
Yeah, you know what, I would second that. The Cooper Hewitt guidelines, it's probably, to be honest, I would say that. And to, I think, understand more of, like, again, this, like, the cultural reasons why, like the engaging blind people in a way that's more interesting and dynamic. I think that a really great resource that helped me so much to understand why this is important, why description is important to blind people, I would totally go to Georgina Klieg's book, More Than Meets the Eye, What Blindness Brings to Art. It's a fun read. She is the coolest lady. She's blind and she's traveled the world in different museums, and she just talks about so much of this. And I think it gives a really good cultural understanding of why image description and any kind of description is important, but also why it can be, it goes beyond it being an accommodation or a service. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So we are actually at the portion of this where we wanted to do something a little bit more interactive, a sort of
Mhm.
practicum of stretching your alt text brain muscles. So what we're going to encourage everyone to do is, if you have your phone nearby or if you're on your computer, if you can pull up an image from your photo roll, and we're just going to take 3 minutes to look at that image and write down all of the objects that you see within the image. And you can just list it out. It doesn't have to be a description yet. Just pick an image and describe or just write down the objects that you see, just in list form.
Yeah, and this is Bojana speaking. It could be objects, it could be colors, just any nouns, the different things that might be in that image. Yeah. And just like
Uh,
think of this as like a brainstorming kind of exercise.
yeah. So we'll come back at 1:06. We're just going to give those 3 minutes for everyone to make those lists.
The prompt appears at bottom left. Pause the video now, then resume when finished with your list.
All right, so we're at that 1:06 time now. So hopefully you have just a brief list of things that are in your photo. This next part, we're going to take 3 minutes to write a list of adjectives of the mood and tone that are evoked in the image. Bojana, do you have anything else to add to what we might be adding to our list?
Yeah, I mean, I like mood, tone, any adjectives, how you may describe the image. And I would say even like, if you have 5, that's great. If you want to go beyond 5, that's also great. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. We're going to take another 3 minutes for this. So again, just 3 minutes to write down a list of adjectives, things that evoke the mood and tone of the piece.
The prompt appears at bottom left. Pause the video now, then resume when finished with your list.
All right, we're at 1:09 now. So hopefully you have 2 lists, this list of sort of nouns and a list of adjectives. So at this point, I'm going to encourage us to come off of anonymity and we can turn on our videos. And if anyone would like to just read their first list, Bojana, do you think if people want to hold up, if they would like to hold up their image that they described to the camera as
Yeah,
they
so
read their list?
I think maybe we can just keep it to the text.
Yeah.
I mean, because they could do that, but then we would have to take the time to also
Mhm.
then have them describe the whole image to me or to
Exactly.
anybody
Yeah.
else who is blind here.
Mhm.
And also before you start to talk about your lists, I would say just say your name and
Mhm.
give a brief self-description. And I really also want us to think about this as just time to think about which was it harder or more, or was it easier to write the nouns down or the adjectives? What was the process like? Was it different than how you usually might be thinking about things in an image? Because now we're framing it as, alt text. But yeah, let's go. Let's see what were the images.
Yeah. Let's just start. Yeah. With would anyone like to read their first list of nouns? I see a hand up from Sam. Sam, could you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, this is Sam, they, them. I am a white person in my late 20s with a brown buzz cut and thick glasses. I'm wearing a checked button down and sitting in front of a white wall. My list of nouns are toddler, curly brown hair, ladybug costume, antennae, blue door, shoes by the door, purple bucket, red sneakers, blue peacock wallpaper, holiday doormat, folded laundry, hardwood floor, and black pants and long sleeve shirt.
Nice. Did you find how did you take the full 3 minutes to write that first list?
I took a good amount of time. Yeah, I think most of it.
I do want to talk about those additional questions that Bojana has, but is there anyone else who would just like to volunteer to read their first list?
I can read my first list. It's short. I got a little bit distracted. Hi, this is Ashley. I am a Black woman. I'm not, my camera's not on. I said I look raggedy today. Sorry, guys. But my name says Lorraine Ashley. I share this account with my mom, so we're both in the picture together. But my list, hold on, let me pull it up. Actually, this was kind of, I picked one because I thought it was a little challenging of how to say what's there, because the photo's really about something else, but it's refrigerated shelf, beer ring packs, each one missing. I was trying really hard to keep the nouns and the adjectives separate, but I found they just kept kind of running together for this description. Because I took the picture because I was like, why is there beer missing from the shelf? That's weird. So.
I think that's really interesting what you said about just picking out the objects, and it was challenging because it wasn't really what the photo was about. And I think that goes back to how people traditionally write alt text. They will just perhaps only write what is seen and what the objects are in the image, but that may totally be off the mark as far as like what the image is about. So I'm glad you brought that up and talked about that that feeling.
Would anyone like to volunteer to read their second list, the list of sort of adjectives and mood and tone?
I can. This is Karen. I'm from CCAC, and I am, I use any pronouns. I'm white, I'm femme, I have brown hair and glasses, and I'm sitting in a cluttered room with a lot of books and plants behind me. And the words that I came up with for my image were close up, confusing, weird, funny, decorative. That one has a question mark next to it, and colorful.
Did you take the full 3 minutes to do your list?
Honestly, I took extra minutes for the objects and then fewer minutes for the adverbs. Adjectives. Sorry, it's been a long time since I parsed which of those was which.
I know, grammar, what? I wonder, and if anybody wants to jump in, it's interesting that you say it took you longer to write the objects. I wonder, did anybody else find one or the other more challenging, or was there anything that surprised you through the process of picking out the objects or the adjectives?
This is Sam again. I found it challenging to capture the tone of both the subject of my picture and the image at large, because the toddler in the image is looking kind of nervous, but the vibe of the whole picture is like playful and kind of like homemade, and there's sort of like a sense of humor about it. You can see from the photographer, but not from the kid in the picture themselves. So I found capturing that in different adjectives kind of challenging.
Right. Yeah. And I think that sometimes, being able to capture that mood, and in these contradicting different things that are happening in an image can be one of the more difficult things to write about, and how do you balance that? And again, I'll say, like, for me, to be honest, and me and Shannon, we laugh about this. We're like, we're not the best alt text writers. Like we have, we find that so many people have amazing descriptions, and we kind of are we can talk about it and we practice it, and I think obviously our descriptions are solid, but it takes practice, and I think it's good to not try to compare yourself to other people, and just to practice and keep doing it, and it be okay with failing forward, because I will tell you this, a blind person that comes across your alt text, it's always a pleasant surprise because it's like, oh my gosh, somebody actually wrote alt text or image description. And so just remember that if you're ever feeling like, oh, I'm not doing a good job, or I'm not capturing the exact balance of the, so I think that's something to remember when having difficulties or challenges with an image.
This is Ashley. I was going to say I also had challenges. I think also because my photo, my photo was ugly, and I felt, as an audio describer, I felt weird being like, this image is kind of ugly. It's just in a Walgreens refrigerated shelf. Like, usually I think the things that I'm asked to describe are things that have like stronger visual imagery. Like the next photo in my phone is a photo of my mother, and it's like, oh, it's a sunny day, and she's looking cute and has on sunglasses, and there's just a lot more rich visual details to describe. So then to go back to this one where it's like, oh, there's some ugly stickers and there's some like dust on the shelf, I said it was just again much more, it was just more challenging.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you include the word ugly in your
No, because I felt like it was wrong. I've been taught
Yeah.
not, you're supposed to be the neutral party as the describer. So I guess that's a question. As I know we were talking about the poetry, and so I guess that's also kind of a question. So it's like, oh, on alt text, it's like, oh, this isn't, I feel like, again, in the context that someone would ask me to do this, I feel like I don't think Walgreens would want me to be like, Ashley, you should write this shelf is ugly.
Well, then fix up your fridge, Walgreens.
So, I struggled with how to describe it as being like, to let the person draw their own conclusion that it's ugly and barren without me actually telling them.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because something else that's really important that I talk a lot about in alt text or image description is there's no such thing as true objectivity. It is so elusive. Like, no matter what, you are making a creative decision when you describe something, no matter how objective you try to be. And also, I mean, who has been this objective, all-knowing authority for the past 30 or 40 years when it comes to describing things to blind people? It's the people in power, and the people in power have been like straight, cisgendered, older white dudes, and they have been the ones who've been making the rules, and they are the ones who get marked as objective. And then other groups get marked as their thoughts are subjective. And so I really want to dismantle this idea that there is such a thing as true objectivity. And I also think it's important, John Lee Clark also writes about this. He's a deafblind writer, that we also need to trust blind people, that we are going to take things with a grain of salt. We're not going to take a sighted person's description as the end all be all of all description ever, that we have our own internal mechanisms to filter what people say. We can ask questions. We can ask other people, like, what do you think about this image after hearing a description? So I think that maybe it can be freeing to understand that there's no such thing as true objectivity, and that there is something gained when a person is using their own creativity and thought process when they are describing something. For me, that extra creativity and thoughtfulness, it fills this space that is missing from being able to see it. Like, the space that gets filled in with the stranger or friend's perspective or creativity. And to me, that is so valuable and meaningful. So this is something I wanted to mention regarding that.
Yeah. I'm curious about, we spent 3 minutes on each list, and I found myself, with the nouns in particular, writing down things that I don't think are important to the picture, because they're way in the background, or they're not the focus. And I'm just wondering if anyone, as they're looking at their nouns list, as their subjects list, how many of the words on your list would you actually use in description? I would use maybe 5 of these 12 words I had.
I think I had the opposite problem. I think that this is Ashley, excuse me, Ashley with a G. I think I had the opposite problem. I think my problem was that I was already trying to edit as I was writing, especially since I got a little bit caught off with my time. So as I'm looking at this again, ugly shelf with the stolen beer on it, it's like, oh, if you look all the way back, there's some extra, there's actually some Pepsi, there's like a crate of Pepsi in the background, and there's some labels down here. Like I didn't think to write any of those things because I knew that if I were describing it to someone, I wouldn't, but I think to the spirit of the assignment to write down all of the nouns and then go back, I think that there's value in that too.
And I also, I think that's a valuable part of this exercise is writing all the things you see and then reevaluating, right? Like, oh, okay, like maybe I don't need to add this. I don't need to have this. And this can be a useful exercise when you are writing alt text, right? You can go back and be like, oh, okay, I wrote down these 10 different nouns or objects or whatever it might be. Oh, you know what? This one actually isn't so important. And why do I have this in here? Would I really be telling somebody about? So it's a good brainstorming exercise to kind of warm up and then to help you filter out what's important and what's not.
Yeah, as with all writing, the editing happens second,
Right. Yes, totally.
I'm wondering if anyone else in these last couple minutes we have would like to read their second list, their mood, tone, adjectives list.
I'll read mine. My name is Lindsay Young. I am a white female. My camera is not on, but I'm wearing a blue blazer and a penguin t-shirt. And I have short black hair. The photo that I picked, I'll do the adjectives first. So my adjectives were spooky, warm, dark, glowing, indoors, and illuminated. And the photo I picked was a recent photo I took of some jack-o'-lanterns sitting on a fireplace hearth.
Did you find one list harder to make than the other?
The photo itself and like composition is pretty simple. So the nouns were pretty easy. There isn't a whole lot in the photo, and the photo is so dark that you can't really see anything except the pumpkins. So I did kind of being kind of unable to help myself from thinking about, well, how would I put these two lists together to make a description? I did kind of wonder what I would like, is the mood more important than the subject in this case? Do I want to describe like each of the faces of the pumpkins and their expressions, or do I just want to go for like Halloween vibes?
This is Bojana speaking. I mean, your adjectives totally gave me Halloween vibes, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that, of course, everybody's different, but maybe what you do is, keep those vibes, because it kind of gives this overall feeling of the image. And then maybe, if there's a bunch of pumpkins, maybe describe one of the pumpkins, to give an idea of, some of maybe the characteristics of one, so people understand that the focus of the picture are these pumpkins. But, again, that's a creative choice. That's your own choice. But I'm kind of a fan of doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, putting it together so it can give as much of a well-rounded experience to the person who might not be able to see as possible.
And I think we had one more person who wanted to volunteer their list. Is it Shelby?
Yeah, hi, my name is Shelby Capascio, and I am a white, middle-aged adult who really, really loves words and is wearing a pink cabled sweater and light purple glasses. I also have dark curly hair, which is up in a bun right now. And my words and adjectives were orange, unfurl, green, potted, sunlit, soft, upholstered, tall, and warm.
Mm.
Is this was this like a plant in a living room?
It sure was. It was right
Oh,
outside our window.
I think that's really fun. Trying to guess sort of what it is just based on the vibe list alone.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not necessarily the goal of this exercise, but I do enjoy hearing what words are used either with the nouns or the adjectives, and like what does that create in my mind's eye. So and I was kind of also getting that vibe that maybe there's like, some kind of greenery. And I I think that all in all, like with all of these different descriptions and lists, um, I think there was like really great word choices. It seems like, um, some of the things that people had talked about was like, how do I put these two lists together? And I think that partly what I wish is that we had more time together to practice writing alt text. And something that you can do. It's in the resources section of the Alt Texas Poetry website. You can also download a free copy of the workbook. And if you wanted to practice together in groups of 2 or whatever it might be, to practice some of these, different things like taking these lists or even continuing with the workbook to do the other exercises, and to, kind of have more of a complete experience with that image and writing the alt text for it. I would encourage that as well.
Which is a great way to sort of end off this program, actually. We would like to thank Bojana for sharing your expertise and talking so much with us. And actually,
Yeah.
do you want to talk a little bit about your workshop and how people could potentially join that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the workshop I do is with my colleague Shannon Finnegan, and we do a workshop all about this, all about creative approaches to alt text. We do them for all different types of organizations. It's usually an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we go way more in depth some of the history of this project. We talk a little bit more about what alt text is, how it's used. We give examples. We do 4 different exercises, and you can just all the information is on our website. Like I said, that the workshop workbook is available for free to download. And then if you find this to be something that would be useful for your organization, you can just reach out to either me directly. There is also a specific email on our website in order, to request a workshop. And we also have some resources. I guess it's either in the chat. I'm not sure where they put it, but it does have our website for Alt Texas Poetry, and there's a couple other resources. There was a pretty extensive, well-researched article in the New York Times about alt text from different perspectives, different blind people, and different people who write alt text. So I definitely, suggest checking that out. But I just want to say it was such a pleasure just, being able to talk about something that's so important to me. And thank you for your attention and your questions. And I really do appreciate this organization. There's always good image description when I see them post, and definitely have been part of my journey as far as being an access consultant. I followed this organization for a while, so it's great to be able to be here and talk to all you.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And yeah, please look out in the chat for a couple of resources we're going to drop there. And thank you especially also to our accessibility service providers and to the CCA production team. And obviously thank all of you for joining us and offering your support to the CCAC. So again, in the chat, you'll find a link to our feedback survey, which we would love if you could complete. You can also find us on social media via the links in the chat as well. You can stay tuned for more information about our next program in December, the CCAC's annual book club fundraiser event. Save the date for December 5th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. and look for the official announcement soon. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Fade to Black, white text on black background. Ask About Alt Text, presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers: Andy Wilson, moderator, CCAC. Bojana Kokliat, accessibility consultant, author, and artist. Workshop Accessibility: Tina Dillon, real-time captioning. Nikki G. and Greg S., ASL interpreters. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com.